All right. Hi, everybody. Well, hello, hello. Today, we're going to go through Photoshop. We're going to go through some of the basics of Photoshop. Um, this is for my peeps who are new to Photoshop or it's been a really long time. Um, so this is mainly for my art teachers who are willing and able and brave enough to dabble in digital art. Um, yeah, this is going to be kind of a hopefully a good rundown of some of the stuff within Photoshop. Um, I think these first two videos are going to be maybe a little bit long. I'll try to speed through them, but hopefully I'll cover some stuff that you'll use. I think a lot. But I think once we start doing some tutorials where we start to create a little bit, you'll see some of the major tools and functions of Photoshop that we'll be using a lot over and over and over. So the repetition will be good because it'll stick a little bit better. Anyway, all right. So here's Photoshop, right? We got Photoshop open. So with Photoshop's or Adobe CC, you always want to make sure that you're logged in your Adobe CC account. And of course, you can only log into two places at a time. So I'm logged in here to this Surface Pro tablet, and I'm probably logged in at work as well. So I'm good. If you have a third uh, PC logged in somewhere, it's going to give you a pop-up and ask you, hey, you got to quit one of these and, choose your two main ones, right? So you log out of one and then there you go, you're fixed. So a big thing that I want to point out here is that here, the cloud, if that's got an X, that means that it is not syncing up. So synced and backed up, right there, we're good to go. So if you ever have an error message pop up where you're trying to access a file and it's just not opening up, double check that there's no X here. That just means that it's not syncing. I think the quick fix there is just kind of go back to your browser, log into your Adobe CC account, um, close Photoshop, restart Photoshop, and then it should sync up and you're fine. Okay. And of course, this just shows that I am logged in. All right. So here you'll have a lot of, your recent documents. You'll be able to save to the Adobe CC Cloud. And as I think you saw there, right now I've used 2 gigs, just over 2 gigs out of 82 gigs available. So eventually I'm going to start clearing some stuff out. But you can save to the cloud. That way you can access your projects from anywhere, as long as you got Photoshop available, versus just saving it directly to that PC, which you can do as well. All right. All right, here we go. So we'll do new file, right? Of course, open. This is where you would choose from the cloud or you would choose from your PC files. So we'll go new file. And here's where you set up your basic settings. You can do custom, you can do default. You also have some options here for some common settings, whether it's photo, whether it's for print, art and illustration, web application, mobile. So this is nice because your resolution's already set. You can see if it's for mobile, it's down to 72 ppi, which is pixels per inch, versus maybe art and illustration. If this is going to maybe be printed, it's up to 300 ppi, 300 pixels per inch. That way it's nice and high resolution. And of course for mobile, it doesn't have to be that big, and so you don't want to bog down the device or the site or the app or anything like that. Same thing for web. Notice 72 ppi. So those are big things to notice. Also for film and video as well, you have some preset options here, which is really cool. I usually will just, depending on what we're doing with the kids, only because of available sizes for prints there at the school. that I work at. Shout out to Mr. Mungia, who helps me out with printing. 11 by 17 is our go-to. Sometimes the kids will want to print them bigger, and of course they can go to somewhere else to print that, and we just need to set up the file correctly. So 11 by 17, of course you can do your landscape or your portrait orientation. Here you can set up, I usually just work with inches. Of course it's in pixels. That's going to read the resolution here. Usually I'll just run with inches. And then of course 300, if for sure you're going to have you or your student print that artwork eventually, 300 at least is where you want to be at for your resolution. If you're trying to have them work on maybe some artwork for an app or for a website or something like that, you'd want to knock that down to 72. Okay. So we'll stick to 300. Usually RGB is good. Of course, you got bitmap, which is just another version, I guess, of it's a rasterized image, right? All the pixels, it's reading all pixels. Got grayscale, CMYK color. If it's got to be a specific, I guess if it's for print, CMYK is ideal. Your cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Because most high-end printers will read those colors better, but I always work in RGB. Yeah, that's just, I don't know, it's out of habit, I guess. And of course your background, you can change it to something else other than white, or you can do transparent and start off transparent. If you're going to be working with assets maybe that are going to be, you don't need a background, you want to make sure there's no background around the asset that you're creating. You can create a transparent background, and of course you would save that as a PNG. Anyway, I might talk about that later. All right, so 11 by 17, and of course here you can title it, right? You can title it already, and I'll just hit create. All right, so here we have our basic Photoshop interface. I think for this first video, I'm going to try to go through these menus as quick as I can. Again, I don't want to drag these videos on, but I will try to go through these and cover some of the main things that you'll use a lot. And I think in the second video, I'll then jump into the tools for sure, and probably the rest of the interface. Not to say that I won't cover the interface a little bit today, just because there's a good chance I might. All right, here we go. So basic stuff here. We got file, right? File, you got your new, you got your open, browse and bridge. Bridge is a software where you can keep assets, and it's exactly that. It's bridge. It holds assets that you can use in case you're going to be working maybe with, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're going to be going from Photoshop to maybe After Effects or something else, you can keep those assets handy there. Open as a smart object. I think we'll talk about smart objects later. Open recent. So here you can quickly access some files that you've been working on recently. Of course, close all. Close and go to bridge. Save as. So save as is a big one here. Save as, this is where you're going to choose, am I going to save on the cloud, right? Save to Creative Cloud, or I'm going to save on my computer. So that's something important to point out to your students. Make sure they understand there's a difference. So if they save on the computer, they can't access it from home or anywhere else. It's got to be on that same computer. Or unless they're going to save it to maybe a thumb drive or something. But here, cloud documents, they can save it and work on it elsewhere. If they have access to Photoshop elsewhere, they just need to log into their Adobe account. Okay, so that's important right there. Save a copy. It's just saving a copy of your file. You can rename it. Export. Let's see, that one's actually important right there. So export, I guess let's start from the bottom. If you're going to jump to maybe Illustrator, you can export your paths to Illustrator. Layers to files, that would create a lot of files if you're working in a lot of layers. Let's see, save for web legacy. That's actually, I'm gonna click there. Yep, that's how I remember it. So here, this is, I guess, still useful if you're gonna create maybe like a GIF or a GIF. Of course, you can still save as JPEG, PNG, PNG 8, PNG 24. I think that was just the quality. I forget. PNG, basically, it's a PNG is another image file that is not as compressed. The other plus is that you can save artwork with a transparent background, and PNG file will save it with a transparent background. When you go through your documents, it might show up with either a black or a white background, but when you open it and you bring it into another file, it should have a clear background. So like that'd be great for like a logo, let's say. JPEG, it's a rasterized image. It's going to be a little compressed. You can still save it as a high resolution file, and of course your GIFs or GIFs. And yeah, so let's see. Yeah, this is what I remember from like CS6 Photoshop. Okay, where was I? File. So export, and that's why it says legacy. That's kind of the old way. You can quick export as a PNG, and again, PNG it's a nice high quality image. It won't be as compressed as a JPEG, and it gives you that capability to save a transparent background. Or you can hit export as, and here is where, let's say your student's done, they've saved their Photoshop file, but they want to save it out as a JPEG because they want to send it to print or what have you, or maybe just turn it in as a JPEG. Here's where you can go and you can choose your PNG, JPEG, or GIF options. And then here you can adjust the overall quality. So of course, if you're going to print, you would set it to great, right? That way it's the highest resolution possible. So here you have your resolution, scale, roughly the size here. And yeah, you just hit export and you save it to where you need it, right? All right. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Background music. Let's see. Generate, share, invite. Search Adobe stock. I think you actually have to be registered or have that as part of your account, something like that. Place embedded. This one's important. So place embedded. So let's say you have a file. Let's say the kid, the student, they created a character or something like that, and they're working on a background, and they want to bring in the character and drop them into that same file. This is where you could do that. Okay, or let's say they made a logo separately, and then they want to bring in that logo and place it in the corner of their file, of their artwork. So you go place embedded, and then of course you would, let's see, search on your computer. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, let's use one of my files. So I would pick my file and brings it in. And so here you get to move it, adjust it, what have you, and then you can just confirm. Yes. Does it still let me double click? Yes, it does. And there you go. You've confirmed it. And of course, right here, if you see that right there on the thumbnail, that means it brought it in as a smart object. A smart object is a non-destructive type layer where you can resize the work that you brought in, and it's not gonna rasterize it or destroy it more with JPEGs and like bitmap type images. You'll lose quality as you start to kind of resize over and over and whatnot. You lose quality. The smart object kind of locks it in to where you're not going to destroy that quality unless you rasterize the image. So here, and again, I said I didn't promise I wasn't going to go into the interface, but might as well. Here, if I were to right click here and then rasterize layer, and I'm bringing this up because let's say the kid brought in the student brought in their work, right? and then they were like, oh, I'm gonna draw something here. You see how it doesn't let me? It's got that little do not, and then boop, I can't do anything. The smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. Rasterize the smart object. And so you either click OK, it'll rasterize it, or again, you right click on that layer and then rasterize layer, and now it rasterizes it, makes it editable, and but of course here you can lose quality. So if you start to resize and all that good stuff, you're going to lose quality here and there. But of course now I can go ahead and edit. Okay. All right. Let's see. Moving on. Place embedded. Scripts. I don't really mess with scripts. Import, no. Print on copy, file, blah, 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 exit. Okay. Edit. All right, so edits, of course, we have your undo, redo. So, your shortcuts, and I will point out certain shortcuts that you want to memorize. Of course, here you got your Control S, right? If we're going to be working on PC, you got Control S. I think it's Command S on the Mac. So Control S, edit, right? You got Control Z or Shift Control Z. So sorry, to undo, Control Z, redo, Shift Control Z. Copy, right? Control C, Control V. That's not to be confused with like copying a layer. And there's another shortcut that's, I guess, more commonly used, at least for me. Fill, stroke, I'll use those from time to time. Fill is like if you're going to fill in a shape. Stroke is basically another word for outline, if you're going to outline the shape. Puppet warp, that is a nice feature. This could come in handy. So let's see, let me rasterize this really quick. Puppet warp. So Puppet warp is awesome because it subdivides your work, or it subdivides, let's say, a letter. So this can be fun to tweak the shape of a font and really customize it. You can tweak maybe a character, let's say a character, and you want to get them to move a little bit or just kind of warp them even more. So it subdivides it. Now, you got to then lay down these anchor points, right? So it's like you're laying down these thumbtacks. So actually, let me undo. I'm going to put one right here. Put one here. Boop. 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 All right. So it's almost, in a sense, think of it like a bone structure for any, well, it's kind of like in rigging, like in animation. And so now I can, take this and really kind of bend it to my liking according to these anchor points, right? And you can see, depending on where the anchor points are, it's going to try to hold it down and not let it budge as much versus other areas, right? That looks fun, right? So that could be interesting. You could do something with that. But puppet warp is a cool feature. All right. So puppet warp, perspective warp. I don't really use that too much, but yeah, here you can kind of mess with. You can see. You can set up your perspective according to the photo, and then you can then tweak it. That's another thing with this new Photoshop, is that it'll give you these little quick tutorials. So if you're not sure, it's like the eraser tool. It erases things. Type tool. Type, right? So it's really cool. It's got these really quick tutorials. If you're not sure what it does, it'll tell you within a few seconds, like, this is kind of what this tool does. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself because I was supposed to cover that later. All right. Free transform. Excuse me. Control T. That you want to memorize. Control T, free transform. So I'm going to do Control T on the keyboard. So if I just simply grab this, right, it's going to resize and keep the kind of the aspect ratio just locked in, right? Its size dimensions, keep them locked in. But then if I hit shift, if I hit shift and then get one of these, now I can change this individually, right? Whoops, sorry. That pops up if you hold down shift way too long. It thinks you're trying to turn on filter keys and just hit no. You can also hit control, which will then let you take individual points and adjust it further. And this is great for skewing, and then also creating this kind of forced perspective, which is awesome if you're, let's say you're doing like photo bashing or something, and you need to really skew that photograph or that texture. That comes in handy. So you can have that. So do Control T again. Another cool feature here is up here is where you can confirm or deny your change. This warp tool is another good feature. So it subdivides it, and I can then take this and just kind of stretch the image. So this comes in handy if you need to just adjust the image. So the student needs to just adjust it a little bit, or let's say you are working with photographs and you're using a photograph to maybe create a texture on some other object, and you want it to kind of bend and mold with the shape of that object a little bit better. This is a great way to do that, right? And so you can just hit enter on your keyboard and confirm it, right? So it looks like he's kind of like shrugging or dancing. Yeah. And I'm hitting Control Z to undo. Let's do that again. And you can also, if I hit Control on my keyboard, I can add more subdivision points. So, bam. Now I've got more spots to warp from. Ooh, right? Yeah. Okay. You can also do, with the warp tool, you can also do, so right now I'm custom warping in, but you have these presets as well. Do you want to proceed? Yes. And so you have these presets like arc, and of course you grab from here. So again, this also comes in handy. This works nicely with fonts. So, you know, if you want to get that font to maybe bend a certain way, this comes in handy right there. And yeah, there's a bunch of different options. There's bulge. There we go. And it kind of looks like it's going around a can. So maybe if you're doing some kind of design for some kind of canned product or Coke can, maybe that'll help you out a little bit. Where's fish? Fish. Dancing. Fish eye. Right. That's nice. Anyways. Okay. So yeah, so you just cancel that. Alright, so where were we? So transform. So Control T. I was about to say Command T. I'm so used to working on the Mac at work with the kids. So Control T. That's a common one. And of course, transform. Here you have other options: distort, perspective. You know, you can go here. Oh, another thing to cover. Control T. If you right click, here you have some options here, of course, right? You can reach those options that we saw on the menu as well. You can rotate, but you can flip horizontal, right? Flip horizontal, flip vertical. Okay. And of course, I forgot to cover that you can just also rotate by hovering just past the corners, and you can rotate. Okay. All right. Moving forward. Transform, purge, color settings, shortcuts, menus, toolbar, preferences. Yeah, you really won't mess with this too much. I would say the only time you might mess with this is, where was it? I forget where it is. But in here, there's is it 3D? It might be under 3D. There's an option, and that's for like later. Like for me, my students, I do want them to use a 3D sculpted file and bring it in. And apparently, Photoshop, the word on the street is they're supposed to be getting rid of their 3D features, which to me doesn't make sense. I don't know why, but that's something they're supposed to be doing away with. But for now, some of the features are still there. You actually have to shut off a particular option in the software, so that way it'll read that file better. But that's for another time. All right, image mode. Again, RGB, CMYK, all that good stuff. I just like keeping it in RGB. Adjustments. This is where you've got things like brightness and contrast, levels. So brightness and contrast, that's pretty self-explanatory. Levels, these are super important. Control L, shortcut. This is a good one. So levels, if you have, let's say, so like down here, basically this is saying, it's basically set to black at this point. So your shadows, the darkest shadows, you're okay with them going all the way to black. But if you don't want them to go that dark, then you tell Photoshop, all right, I want my shadows to go that dark, and that's it. Okay, and so that definitely changes the look and the feel of the image. Okay, and of course also for your highlights, is that as bright as the highlights will go, or are you going to let them go all the way to white? So if you go too bright, maybe just knock them down a little bit right here. You can also individually adjust maybe your midtones, right? So this is adjusting midtones, and this is adjusting shadows, and this is adjusting highlights. So that's a great way to adjust an image as far as your values, how bright or how dark they appear. Another thing I should have just covered right there, preview. Preview, if that's checked, it's going to show you how it'll look before you confirm. So I usually like to toggle it on and off just to get, the before and after. Okay. Or image adjustment. Curves. Curves is another way to kind of mess with your images and your color. So let's say, like, I can, adjust the values and basically its brightness, how blown out and overexposed it is. And of course you can create multiple points, and then that changes things. I could see this, for photography and maybe a little bit of graphic design. I don't use it too much. If anything, I'll use levels and hue saturation, things like that, but that's available there. Exposure, right here, exposure. If it's too blown out, not blown out enough, right? So that'll adjust that. Offset, gamma correction. Okay. Vibrance, yeah. So you have saturation, desaturation. How vibrant are your colors? Okay. So quick ways to make adjustments. So if you were a student, they've created work, but they're not quite happy with the final look of their colors, their values. These are just a lot of different ways to adjust these things. Hue saturation, Control U, that's a common one that we'll use. So Control U is a good shortcut to remember. And here, of course, lightness, darkness, right? Um, overly saturate, woo, or desaturate, nice and moody, right? And then of course, this is nice. This is I like presenting this option to students. So let's say they draw something and they're like, man, I like it, but I don't like the color anymore. I want to change it. So let's say they created some of the clothing or just some part of the artwork. You can have them select that area, or maybe if it's on its own layer, and you can quickly have them cycle through these options to see, if this is a quick fix to just alter the colors, right? Colorize basically gives it a monochromatic look. So this is a quick way to get that right there. So you have a monochromatic feel, okay, by hitting colorize. All right. Color balance, black and white. Sometimes I'll mess with black and white. And so here, this is where you really get to really dive into like your values in this very finite way. It feels like. So this could come in handy. But this is really getting into the nitty gritty of it. Okay. Photo filter, this is helpful. So this comes in handy. Photo filter, it comes in handy for if you are, let's say they created something and they're like, well, I wanted to have more of a different feel, a warm feel, a cooler feel. Photo filter is a quick way to do that. And so you have the presets here. You got warming filters, cooling filters, and then you have some other specific. You can see it's changing it a little bit. And of course, the density, you determine, how much does that color show up over the artwork. Okay. So let's say we wanted to go with more of a warm tone, right? A warm feel. And that's the original, and that's with the red filter. Okay. So that could be a quick fix for a student. Okay. All right. Photo filter, channel mixer, color lookup, invert. Right. That's just you invert everything, invert the image. That could be pretty cool, right? And I believe the shortcut for that is Control I. Yeah. So quick invert, that could be interesting for some artwork. For a photo edit. Posterize, another good one. So here it's just I don't know, it reduces the image. It reduces the image to specific, almost like values. So I went really high right away. Yeah, there's just too many levels, so it's very close to the original. So here, knock it down to 2. That's what that does. Threshold is a interesting one. This is a cool way to get a cool black and white image. So it just takes out all the color, all the gray, and just reduces it to black and white. So that could be pretty interesting for students' artwork. Okay. Threshold, gradient map, selective color. Yeah, so let's say the reds, I want them to have more yellow. Or no, maybe not so much yellow. So you can adjust, you can influence, all your colors. Maybe what do I have? The greens, I want them to have, Or cyan, whatnot. Okay. Shadows, highlights. Yeah. Again, just another way to kind of really tweak the image. Messing with all your values. HDR toning. Yeah, if you want to proceed. Yeah, let's proceed for now. So it's going to flatten it, and of course here, this is where you can, again, you're adjusting an image at a very finite level. A lot of different things you can do to the image. All right. Desaturate, match color, replace color. Replace color, I've done this maybe a couple times. So let's say I want to replace, yeah, those greens right there, that olive green. Let's see. I'm gonna replace those. Instead, I want it to have a different. So you see that it picked up any of those colors and it's replacing it with this new color. So that's kind of a quick way to do that. If you want it to be that specific. Okay. And I think that's really it. Equalize, I don't use that. Autotone, this is a quick way to let Photoshop kind of do its thing. Autotone, it'll quickly adjust the tones of the image. You can do auto contrast. And it's just adjusting a little bit. So that means I must have done a really good job. Auto color, yeah, it's adjusting a tiny bit. So basically, it's Photoshop it will adjust it to where it feels like it's ideal, I suppose. Image size. This is where you can adjust the overall image. You can adjust the resolution. You can adjust the size of it. Adjust the pixels. So this will adjust the whole thing. So let's say, let's do this. Inches. Let's say I want to knock it down to 11, right? And so it brings it down almost to like an 8 by 11. And so then I'll change this to 72. And then it is going to shrink it dramatically. So it just shrinks it down to that size, the whole thing. Okay. So that comes in handy if you need to resize the document. You want to do that before you get into a lot of heavy work, because if let's say they start small and they realize, oh man, the resolution is so small, I wanted to print this bigger. If they've already poured a ton of work into it and then you resize it, you know, let's say they were working on a 3-inch by 5-inch canvas, they want to jump it up to 11 by 17, it's going to look really green, like really pixelated, real blurry, because you're resizing drastically this small image to a large image. It won't go as well. One thing you could do that'll work is here under resample, nearest neighbor hard edges is a great way to resize from small to big, and Photoshop will do its best to retain a high quality within the image. So what it'll do is it'll detect the hard images of the detail, the hard edges of the detail. It'll just pour in more pixels within those edges, if that makes sense. But that works pretty well. We've taken, in the past with students, we've taken literally pixelated images because we were doing pixel art and I wanted to resize it. And when I didn't use this option, the image looked very blurry. So once I clicked on this option, it kept the very tight pixel art look it just poured in more pixels within it, but it still had that nice clean pixel art look to it. So that is a nice feature right there. Let's say you wanted to extend the canvas. So let's do this. I'm gonna hit C on the keyboard for crop, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring this in. And oops, my bad. I'm gonna bring that in. Confirm. And by the way, when you're working with crop, if that's selected right here, delete cropped pixels, once you confirm the crop, that's gone. If you take that off, then Photoshop should hold on to, see how it held on? Photoshop should hold on to the information that's on the outside edge. So sorry, where was I? Crop. Bring that in. All right, so let's say, oops. Let's say this was the, what happened here? Here we go. You need to resize the canvas, right? Like the student, let's say they're like, oh, I want to make this into like this full scene. How do I do that? How do I make the canvas bigger? Instead of shrinking this, this character, instead of saying, all right, well, let's just shrink him, I guess you could. Stop it. What you could also do is go to image and go to canvas size, and here is where you can extend the canvas. So let's say inches, let's go back to 17 by 11. Now, if you just do it without messing with any of this, it's going to go ahead and expand it to every corner. So then you'll get that. But if you what was it, 11 by 17, if you choose a specific direction, then Photoshop will know, like let's say if I hit the top, it's going to expand downward and outward. There you go. Okay, so that's how that works. All right. Image size, image rotation. Of course, you can rotate your image counterclockwise, clockwise, flip horizontal, flip vertical. Duplicate, apply image calculation. I don't use any of that. All right, moving on. Layers. So layers, of course, this is where you can choose a new layer, background from layer, artboards. Right here, these are two shortcuts to remember. Control J and Shift Control J. Super important. Layer via copy, meaning let's say you want to copy the layer. You'll hit Control J. Let's say there's a selection, like there's part of the artwork that they want to copy it. You'll select it and you'll hit Control J. Vice versa, if it's a part of the artwork that they want to cut and create its own layer from that, so basically remove it from that layer and turn it into its own layer, it would be Shift Control J. So let's see that real quick. So I'll just do, let's make a copy of this layer. So I'm going to hit Control J. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to highlight that layer, hit Control J, bam. Got a copy of the layer, right? Control Z. I'm going to select this area, right? With my lasso tool, I'm going to select that area. I'm going to hit Control J, and you see how I made a copy of that selection on a new layer. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to take that same selection. This time I'm going to do Control Shift J, and see how it copied it, or sorry, it cut it from that layer, right? And it put it on a new layer completely. Okay, so that's how you would do that. All right, Command D for deselect. Okay, so yeah, Control J, Shift Control J. I would memorize that. Export as new fill layer, new adjustment layer. Adjustment layers, these are good. So I guess since I'm talking about layers, I might as well talk about the shortcuts to those. So down here, this is your layer menu, right? Or your layer panel, layer window, right? So here you've got your trash can. Here you have the shortcut to create a new layer. Here you have a shortcut to create a new group, right? All right. All right. So let's see. Back to what we were saying. So in our layers here, we have, so here's our layers menu, right? Our layers window. And here we have our trash can, right? Of course, you can either click there to delete that layer, or you can just simply drag to the trash can to get rid of that layer. Here's our shortcut for our add a new layer, create a new layer, right here. This little icon looks like a folder. That's to create a group. So you can create a group, and this is to help you organize your layers. So if you start really building up your how many layers you have in a document, you can organize it by grouping your layers. So what you can do, I can click here. I'm gonna shift click the next layer so that way I can highlight both at the same time. And then I can just simply drag these into that group. As you can see now, they are part of that group. And I can shut them off by hitting the eyeball to to show or hide those layers. And so that's how you can group them. And of course, you can double click there and rename that group. And then, of course, if you want to delete the group, right, that's going to delete all of it. If you just simply delete on the keyboard, it's going to delete all of it. The other thing I can do is I can hold down or right click, sorry, and then I can delete group. Where is it? Delete group. And here it gives me the option, and it asks me, do you want to delete everything from that group or just the folder only? I want to delete the group folder only and keep everything else. So you see it just got rid of the folder and left me with the layers. All right. Here, these are like adjustment layers. So these come in handy. So earlier we talked about things like hue saturation. I think we were in the image and adjustments layer, or sorry, menu. And we talked about brightness and contrast levels, hue saturation, all that stuff. Here, if you use these to adjust, let's say, our levels, if I adjust it this way, hit OK, and I keep working, that eventually that becomes permanent, right? If I make so many changes and I can't undo anymore, like it's pretty much permanent, right? It's part of the artwork now. Another way to do this in a non-destructive way is to use an adjustment layer. So let's say I'm going to go to levels. So it gives me this new, let me get rid of this one. It gives me this new layer here. And so here I can adjust my levels, right? But, excuse me, put that there. It's in a non-destructive way. So let's say I realize, I don't like that. I can go back here, double click on that, bring it back to where it was at 1.00, and I'm back to my starting point. So it does it in a non-destructive way. It does not make it permanent. Really the only drawback to doing this is things like adjustment layers and layer masks, which are what these are. Those type of things, they increase your file size exponentially. So that's really the only drawback. But that way you can always go back, your students, and change it back or continue to edit what you'd like in a non-destructive way. Okay. And what I mean again by non-destructive is that it does not make it permanent. All right. This part right here, that's what's called a layer mask. And a a layer mask is basically something that hides or reveals something in a layer. So for instance, let's say I am going to, let me zoom out here. I'm going to make this pretty drastic. I'm going to make this really drastic. And then over here on the layer mask, I can use this to reveal the old version, right, before I made that change. Now, layer masks only work in black and white. Since the mask is already white, I'll need black to basically hide or reveal the old version. So watch, I'm going to go ahead and paint with black, and you can see that it's starting to add black to the mask, and you can see there's the old version. If I were to shut off, just hide this, see there's my old version, here's the adjustment layer, but I can use this to kind of subtly show the old version and only put that adjustment where I need it. I'm going to switch to white so I can put a little bit more of that adjustment here, if that makes sense. So a mask just simply hides or reveals what's underneath, or it hides and reveals what that adjustment that was made in that particular layer. Okay. So you see I'm painting with black again. It's revealing the old version. I can use white. So again, it's just hiding or revealing the level adjustments that we had made to that particular on that layer. Okay. All right. This is basically the shortcut to add a mask to a layer. So let's say over here I wanted to add a mask. There you go. I would just click that and that would add a mask right there. Okay. This affects, so let me get rid of that right here. These are things like drop shadow, outer glow, bevel and emboss, stroke, which is another word for outline. Those are just quick changes you can make on the fly. So let's say, let's see, let's do this. I'm going to quickly select this dude's head, just kind of loosely. And I'm going to put it on its own layer. So I'm going to command, I'll just copy it actually. Command J it. And then I'm going to move it just so you can see. So if I double click on this layer over here, not on the name, off to the side, I get these styles right here, these effects. So I can put a drop shadow on it. So just so you can clearly see it, I click on there and you see how it's creating a drop shadow. I can affect its blur, so on and so forth. Okay, so you can see I put a drop shadow really quick. I can also put an outer glow, right? So we'll increase that. So just a quick ways to make some quick visual effects type edits. I can put a stroke on it. So let's change it to white so we can see it easier. And there you go. All right. So that's where you would find those. All right. I'm going to drag that to the trash can. Let's see. Cool. So that's that. I'll get into more layers, more information on layers later in the next video. Talk about some other features that are available there. Okay, so we're good there. Let's go to, let's see, layer. So I think we're good there. Fill adjustment layers, layer mask, we talked about that. Smart objects, we talked a little bit about smart objects earlier. Group layers, hide layers, arrange, lock layers, we can talk about that later. Merging, we can talk about that, I think, later. Type. Okay, so the type menu, of course, this is if you're using the type tool. Let's see, pretty standard stuff. I think I'll talk about more about the type tool later once I do the next video on the actual tools. So that's where you'd find your type menu. Select. There's some good stuff in here. So select menu. So let's use a basic lasso here. So I'm gonna make a selection here. Some good things to use here are, one, Control D is pretty important. Control D to deselect. That would be really important in the case of if your student is working and let's say they made a selection and they weren't even aware of it, like it's really tiny. So I'm gonna try to make a tiny selection, let's say like that small, and they just don't notice it. So they come over here and nice bright color. They're trying to paint, but they're like, Mister, it does not let me paint. I don't know why. If that selection is there, it thinks, oh, he's trying to work within this boundary, this space of the selection. So a lot of times I'll tell the students, go ahead and hit Command D or Control D, sorry, and now paint. Oh, it works. There you go. So they accidentally had something selected. It was really tiny. They couldn't even notice it. So Control D, you want to memorize that. Reselect is a good one. Shift Control D is the shortcut. So that way, let's say you had something selected, and you accidentally clicked off and you're like, oh man, I had it selected perfect. Go ahead and hit Shift Control D or go up to the menu. So let's see, I'm going to Command D it. Shift Control D brings it back right back. Okay. Inverse is really great. So if I have that area selected, of course it thinks I want to work within that area, right? But what if I wanted to work on the outside of that? This comes in handy a lot. So what you would do is you would select the inverse, which in this case shortcut is Shift Control I. Okay. Shift Control I. Now you can see that the selection is along the outside edges of the artwork. So it is now going to allow you to work on the outside of that selection. Right? I'm going to Shift Control I it back to the inside. And now I'm working on the inside. Right? So that's important. That's a good one to remember. Okay. Let's do another quick selection. And deselect. Isolate layers is a good one. That's a great one. So that way you see what happened to the layers. Let's go back. Click that off. So you see over here on my layers, I have them all available, right? Sometimes students by accident start working on the wrong layer. They didn't notice that they were working on the wrong layer. This is kind of a good way to micromanage that, I guess, to make sure they're only working on that layer. So you can isolate layers, and it ensures that you're only working on that one layer. That way you don't accidentally go into the wrong one. Okay. Select mask. Oh, this is a good one. So let's say I'm working on, I have a selection, but I need to alter it just a little bit. You can use modify, which you can expand it, you can contract it, you can feather it, smooth it out a little bit more. So let me smooth it out by, let's say, 20 pixels. It kind of rounds out the edges a little bit. Let's say I need to grow it a little bit. I'm gonna modify it. I'm gonna expand it. Let's expand it by 50 pixels. Boop. See how it grows that? Or vice versa, you can contract it and make it smaller. Okay. Feathering. Feathering comes in handy. So let's say right now I'm at 0 pixels in feathering, meaning whatever I paint, it's going to give me a pretty crisp edge. See how the edge is really sharp, right? Well, let's say you didn't want it that crisp because you wanted it to kind of fade into something else. You would change your feathering right here. I'll jump it up to, let's say, 63, just so it's noticeable, hopefully. And I'll go ahead and paint again. And notice how the edges are nice and blurry because it's feathering it by 63 pixels. So that makes a difference. Okay. All right. All right. Put that down to 0. else? What else? You can grow here, also just like expanding. You can transform selection here, or what you can do if you're on the selection tool, you can right click over it, and here you can transform selection also. On top of that, you can deselect, select inverse, feather, layer via copy, layer via cut. Talked about that earlier. Transform selection. I can take this selection and adjust it. Okay. Okay. What else? Oh, yeah, I can also, if I right click over it, not sure what happened there. All right, I guess not. Okay. Fill or stroke. So you can fill it, or you can stroke that particular line. So let's say we'll do 9 pixels at that color center, and so it creates a stroke along that selection. So that could come in handy as well. And you can also load selections. You can save selections. So if you have a particular selection shape you want to reuse, you can also save that out if it's going to be a common selection for you. All right, filters. Filters are pretty important. I could see that being very useful for students. So neural filters, those are fancy filters. And so these you can download. There's some really cool ones. I've yet to really mess with these, but there's some good ones like skin smoothing. You can see an example of how, his skin is so much smoother when you compare the two. Super zoom, JPEG artifacts removal, so it really redefines and makes the image have a higher quality. Colorize. Style transfer is pretty cool because you can take 2 photos and kind of merge the two to this new style. It takes the style of that, merges it with the information from this photo. So those are pretty neat. You also have some other filters that are readily available through Filter Gallery. Some are also here. But Filter Gallery, you can go through these, and there's some that I use quite often, just depending. Like let's say, like stylize, it gives me that kind of look, which is really cool. You can add texture. You could turn this dude into stained glass. Sketch, kind of have like this halftone look, kind of like a newspaper print. Graphite pen. Distort, let's see, glass, that's kind of cool. Ocean ripple, like these can come in handy for certain effects. Plastic wrap is neat. It's kind of nice, huh? Cutout was one of my favorites. I love cutout. Just gives it this really cool, I don't know, it's kind of like on the verge of comic book styling, but you can mess with the settings here and adjust. So really cool stuff. You can really simplify it. Anywho, all right, so that's under Filter Gallery. Filter. Okay, so then aside from that, we have, let's see, Liquify is a good one. Vanishing points, that's like for perspective. Liquify, I'll use that from time to time. This is a cool version of the smudge tool. But what's awesome with this is that, I can take this and, just kind of smudge this dude around. Just really bends the information. And then I can use this brush to kind of reconstruct what I did. So Photoshop basically memorizes what it once was and then puts it back together. So if your student goes too far, no fear, we quickly fix it, right? Put it back together. Smooth tool, it's kind of just smoothing out which kind of did. Fix that over there. Forgot about that. Twirl clockwise. So this, it's trying to twirl the information in a spiral. You can pucker. So I'm gonna pucker this dude's mouth. Mwah. There you go. It's like he's puckering up. And you can also bloat, right? So I'm gonna bloat. This dude kind of inflates him, right? There you go. So really cool. Reconstruct this guy. All right, so that's a very cool tool to use. Could come in handy for the kids and maybe some effects they want to do to their artwork. And we have, let's see, liquefy, 3D. That's for something later. Blur, that's a good one. Common one that I use a lot is Gaussian blur or motion blur. So if I'm adding like a snow falling effect, creating snow or like embers of a fire, and I want some of them to look like they're blurred with motion, I'll use motion blur. Gaussian blur, you can see already. Let me crank this up, right? Nice even blur. Of course, hit preview so you can see the before and after. That comes in handy if you're doing maybe like a landscape and you're trying to blur out the background, or you're trying to blur out the foreground or something. You can use that for anything really. Blur gallery, distort. Yeah, some of these are kind of cool. Will come in handy. Ripple will be nice for like water. Pinch. Displace is cool if you're gonna, let's say you're adding a certain texture to a student's face and you want it to kind of bend with the face, like bend with the nose, the bridge of the nose, and so on and so forth. There's a certain technique, a couple of steps that you need to do to make that look believable for that effect, and displace would be where you would do that. Noise comes in handy. You can add noise, make it look, dated maybe. You can add noise to an image. You can remove noise from an image. You can reduce. Pixelate, this comes in handy. Color halftone. So we can set this to, I think it's 45. And I don't know, we'll do 2. No, let's do 4. And so you can see that it's got that nice halftone right there, like a newspaper print. Okay. Pixelate. Render. Sometimes I've used this for like lens flare, some clouds. Sharpen, that one comes in handy. I'll use unsharp mask a lot. So let's say that student's working on artwork, but part of it looks a little bit blurry, just because they didn't get too much into detail, or their brush was a little blurry, soft edged. I'll use this just to kind of tighten up the image a little bit. Let me make this more extreme just so you can see. It's basically trying to take all those pixels and really tighten them up, and increase the amount of pixels within the work. You see how it affects it. Yeah, if you go too far, it looks really bad. Okay. All right. Sharpen, stylize. Yeah, you can use like oil paint. That one's cool. And so you can give your image kind of this oil paint feel, which is neat, right? Really creates this stylized look to your work. And yeah. All right, 3D, that'll be for another day. It's a whole different thing, even if we'll see if Photoshop keeps it around. View, this is just for like your zoom in, zoom out, flipping horizontal. Screen mode, you have standard screen mode, full screen mode with menu bar, and full screen completely. The shortcut for that is F. So if you just hit F on the keyboard, you can see it increases the size of it, gets rid of what's unnecessary. And then if I hit F again, it's just the artwork. Hit F again, brings it all back. view. Oh, rulers. Rulers come in handy. So rulers, you see how now I have these rulers on the end. This is helpful because if you click on the ruler, you can drag over some guides. So, you know, if you need to line something up, you have these guides here that you can set up. And of course, you can use the move tool, grab the guide, move the guide, right? So that if you're trying to set up a specific composition or line certain things up, that could come in handy. You can also, you can snap. So if you're going to draw, it's going to kind of try to snap to these guides, or you can remove snap. So that way it's not, you know, jerky as you're drawing. You can clear guides, lock guides. You can hide them. So show. For now, I'm just going to take off guides. Okay. But yeah, those come in handy. I think that we're good there. Plugins, I don't use plugins too much. That's if you want to add something really cool to Photoshop. A lot of different apps, they create plugins to, it's like upgrading your software or modding your software. You can add something else to work with Photoshop. Window, this one's helpful. This is basically all the list of different windows that you can have in your Photoshop interface. So right now, color, layers, options, and tools are checkmarked. That means that they're visible. If I checkmark or take checkmark off color, you see my color window disappeared. So if a student accidentally closes it, you can go here and bring it back. There's also preset workspaces. So essentials would look like that. I think I was working in 3D, so just put it back to there. Sometimes a student might accidentally get rid of their tools. All right, oh, Mr. I lost my tools. First place to check is window, and then make sure tools is turned back on. Another thing that could happen is they might accidentally hit the tab button, and tab will kind of hide certain things. So just tell them to hit tab and their interface will kind of come back. Sometimes that happens as well. All right. And of course you can move these things around, right? And just kind of drag them and put them where you want them. And you can also kind of click and drag to resize them. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So that's pretty much it for the menus, really. The next video, it'll mainly be about tools. I'll try to get more into the tools and the different functions. Right now, there's only, so many tools here, but there are really a lot of tools. And I'll try to, honestly, I'll cover what I think will be the more important ones. There's a bunch of these that I really, to be honest, don't even use. I don't even know. There's some of them that I've never used. I'm pretty sure they have their purpose, but I haven't needed them yet. So I'll get into that on the next video. We'll cover tools. All right, hopefully that helps, and see you on the next one. Bye.
If you want more videos like this,
smash that like button and subscribe.